Hello everybody and welcome back to our lecture series. I'm Ted, your host, and for this lecture we're going to continue right along with our discussion with our look at the Argead dynasty. And in our last lecture we looked at the life and the career, the very successful career of Philip II of Macedon. Philip is often credited with turning Macedon from a second-rate backwater power, into the premier state of not only the Aegean world, but of the entire Near East, of all of these states, cultures, civilizations that we've been examining in the Eastern Mediterranean. Philip, through the course of his career, he elevates Macedon to the very height of that social order. At the time of his death, they will be ranked just below Achaemenid Persia. And of course, Philip's career can be broken down into his reformation of the army, which was critical to his success as a king. He used his army in a number of means, mainly to conquer and subdue neighboring territories, but also to reorganize and reorient the Macedonian peoples themselves. The military became a way for the Argead dynasty, the Argead kings, to draw upon all the resources of their kingdoms. They brought in those marcher lords, those border barons. They reoriented them into serving the royal dynasty instead of looking out for themselves. They brought in more of the Macedonian population, the bland Macedonians, the lower orders of Macedon. They brought them into the army, reorienting, building upon, I should say, their existing loyalties to the Argead dynasty. And then, of course, Philip had the diplomat, and of his age, of the age of Philip II, I would say that he was the preeminent diplomat in his section of the world, in his quarter of the world. That the wily diplomacy, the outright bribery, and the sheer dedication to getting his will, getting his way, and not being afraid to play the long game to accomplish his goals. All hallmarks of Philip's remarkable career. And at the end of his career, Macedon had united, had united itself, had enlarged itself, and had intruded into Greek affairs. And with the hegemon, the Macedonian kings, the Argead dynasty, the Argead kings, they were the hegemons of the Greek world. And with all of these resources, with the vast resources of Macedon and with the resources of classical Greece, Philip prepared to, if not simply secure the freedoms of the Greeks in the on the fringe territories, satrapies of the Persian Empire, then he at least attempted to impose himself as an imperial figure on par or above the Achaemenid great kings of the Persian Empire. And it is at this point that we pick up the story of our narrative, on our Macedon narrative, with the career of Philip's eventual successor, his second son and his successor, Alexander III of Macedon, also known as Alexander the Great. And he was undoubtedly one of history's greatest commanders. Throughout his career, he was undefeated in combat. Or at least it does not descend to us that Alexander suffered defeat in combat. Alexander was the son of Philip II of Macedon and Olympias of Epirus. Alexander's career evolved from a series of small raids leading the advance guard of Philip II's army to the conquest of the entirety of the Persian Empire. Now, Alexander's career consists of 4 major set-piece battles. 1, the Granicus River. 2, the Battle of Issus. 3, the Battle of Gaugamela. And Gaugamela really cemented Argead control over the Persian Empire. And 4th, the Battle of the Hydaspes River, which marks his last great victory, and really sort of marks the direct interactions between the Aegean world, that would be the classical Greek states, and the Macedonian kingdom, the core heartland to the Macedonian kingdoms, and the Indus Valley civilizations, what we would now call the civilizations in the Indian subcontinent. This battle introduces them. Alexander and his men see elephants for the first time, and it establishes a direct link between those two spheres of the world, those two cultural spheres. Now, through the course of his career, Alexander captures the Persian royal family, and in a remarkable move, he treats them with kindness. And this was a calculated move on Alexander's part. During the middle, I should say from the beginning of his campaigns against Darius III, Alexander presented himself as the hegemon of the Near East. He presented himself as the great king, and when he came into possession of the great king's family of the Achaemenid dynasty. And he came into possession of Darius' mother, his wife, and his daughters. He presented himself as that central dynastic figure. He treated them with kindness. He treated them as he would his sister. He treated them as though he would his mother. He accomplishes this remarkable feat. And by far, this had to be the most remarkable feat of his career. He defeats the great king's war fleet. Not by challenging them directly, but by capturing all of their refitting ports. He captures the port city and really the city-state, the city-state kingdom of Tyre. Now, Tyre is located on an island. So Alexander had a great causeway constructed that connected Tyre to the mainland. Now, the city was savagely and ruthlessly sacked. It was made a lesson. It was turned into an example that was taught as a lesson to all the other cities of the Near East. What happened to Tyre became a reminder of what happens when Alexander is defied. Now, the capture of Tyre and the other port cities deprived the Persian war fleet of their service ports, which meant that they could not they could not undergo the routine refittings that these ships needed. The event that truly allows Alexander, though, to reign as great king is the assassination of Darius III. Now, Darius had lost his contest with Alexander, but he did not relinquish his claim as the great king of Persia. And as long as Darius lived, Alexander would always be nothing more than an invader. Not the openly recognized or the rightly recognized great king of Asia, great king of all of the territories and states that we've covered so far. He would always be this interloper, this Macedonian barbarian interloper who was marching in and causing a great tumult. But the assassination of Darius by the disgruntled Persian nobleman allows Alexander to insert himself. He captured the Persian royal capital. He had I think Babylon already in his possession. But he has a Persian royal capital. He had the Persian royal family, and he defeated Darius. And Darius has just been assassinated by a disgruntled Persian nobleman. So he easily just inserts himself into the position of into the role of great king. Now, Alexander, during the course of his career, he conquered Egypt. He took Egypt from Darius III, and he establishes a city. He found the city of Alexandria, and he does this in the marshes, in the sort of the swamplands where the Nile branches out as it enters the Mediterranean. Now, Alexandria in Egypt was the most successful of all of the Alexandrias, and Alexander, everywhere he went, he found a city named after himself. Alexandria was modeled after the Greek-style polis, a Greek-style city. And during his time in Egypt, Alexander also went to the Oracle of Siwa. Now, the Oracle at Siwa was very similar to the Oracle at Delphi. Now, Siwa is located at a site deep into the desert. And at Siwa, there were statues of the gods, and these gods spoke. They spoke to the oracle, and everyone who went there, they went there to settle disputes. On the way to Siwa, Alexander and his retinue, they got lost in the desert, and they were saved by a very unlikely hero, by very unlikely heroes. They were saved by crows. These crows were feeding on the crushed insects on the road to Siwa. Wagons and so forth, carts, they had to make the journey to Siwa. And on the roads that existed, the little bugs, little insects, little critters that were run over by the cart wheels would serve at the carrion prey, the carrion food for these circling birds. And so they're lost in the desert, and then they see the birds circling, and they go to investigate, and they find that the birds are eating the dead insects on the road. So they simply travel along the road to Siwa. And once they get to Siwa, he's greeted by the priest, by the priests who run the temple, who run the oracle, who oversee the oracles. He presented with gifts by them. Now Alexander travels there to really just to ask one question, and one question in particular: if the killers of his fathers, of his father Philip, if they have all been killed, if they've all been punished. And he's answered yes. Now, there's another interesting fact about Alexander's trip to Siwa, and this involves the chief priest. When the chief priest met Alexander, he greeted him as the son of Zeus. Now, this had a major impact on Alexander's later career, as he crafted a divine image of himself. Now, Alexander allowed the priests to govern in Egypt, and his reign was generally seen as a period where Egyptian religious rights were restored. They had, of course, been under siege during the Persian period of Egyptian history. Now, Alexander also starts construction on a temple at Waset, at Thebes, as the Greeks would call it, before he left to continue his campaign against Darius. And there's another interesting fact about Alexander during his career in Egypt. When he was crowned as the Nusut of Egypt, he faced a complication. There's a very prominent X in Alexander. But there are no X's in the Egyptian alphabet. So Alexander, he got really creative. He used a K and an S to write his name. So it goes from Alexander to Alexander. He had the K and the S sort of sound similar to the S, and it still works. I was looking at the Russian name, Alexander, and there is no X in it. They use a K and an S as well. So in a way, his Egyptian spelling of his name lives on in the present Russian or Slavic spelling of Alexander. Now, as Alexander's career progressed and he was able to successfully mount his conquest of the Persian Empire, he decided to push further east, and he faced a very serious army revolt in India. The Macedonian army, they revolt against him. They don't want to go any further. They have plenty of plunder. Many of them have wives and sweethearts and children. They want to go home. They've been on campaign for over 10 years. They've had enough. This is way more than Philip ever put them under. There's no reason for them to go on any further. They've accomplished their great task, conquering the Persian Empire. They are satisfied. They forced Alexander to turn back. They refused to go any further. After his conquest, Alexander planned on the integration of the many peoples of his empire, of the many peoples that we have spent our up to now the entirety of our course discussing. But he does not do this. He's not really allowed to do this. He dies in Babylon on his way back to Macedon. And now, after his death, his empire begins to splinter, and his great generals divide his empire among themselves. On his deathbed, Alexander is supposedly asked by his generals who will succeed him, and he replies with the words, "To the strongest." Who will succeed him, and his last words are "the strongest," and that is very doubtful. Sources indicate that he lost the ability to speak, and that he became so feeble that he can only slightly nod his head to acknowledge somebody. Now, on his way back to Macedon, his body is hijacked by one of his generals, Ptolemy, who had established himself in Egypt. Ptolemy hijacked Alexander's body in Syria. Now, Ptolemy, after hijacking Alexander's body, he had a caliphate made, and then this was pulled by mules, and it was equipped with golden bells. And he takes Alexander's body back to Memphis, and where it lays in state, while his tomb, called the Soma, was being built in Alexandria. Now, Alexander's body and his tomb are lost to history. The exact location of his remains are lost. We do know that they are still somewhere in the city of Alexandria. We just don't know where. Now, but before his tomb was lost, however, the later Ptolemies, the descendants of Ptolemy, his general, they robbed his tomb. They fell on hard financial times. They needed quick money. They looked around and they saw the golden ornaments, and the golden sarcophagus of Alexander, and they simply took it. They had a glass sarcophagus, a glass coffin made for him, and they took the golden one and they put him inside the glass coffin. And there's this very sort of like morbid curiosity of visiting Romans coming in and seeing the tomb of Alexander the Great, looking upon his earthly remains. Now, there is another legend concerning Alexander. Now, this legend concerns the last native dynasty of Egypt, the last native dynasty, the last native king, a man named Nectanebo. And the legend says that Nectanebo, upon his flight from Egypt after the final fall of Egypt to the Persians, he flees. He heads to the court of Macedon, to the court of Philip II, where he's given refuge. Philip does so to gain insight on Macedonia, on Persian battle tactics, and Nectanebo just happy to be someplace where he won't be openly handed over to the Persians. The legend states that before Philip went to lay with Olympias met Nectanebo, and they had a romantic affair, and the result of that affair was Alexander. Now, this was mainly told in Egypt, and it was really sort of propped up by during the Ptolemaic dynasty. There is no historical evidence to support this. It's just an interesting legend to sort of legitimize Alexander and, by extension, the Ptolemaic dynasty. But it's a very interesting story, in my opinion. Now, as I stated earlier, Alexander's conquest united all of the land that we've discussed so far: Macedon, Greece or Hellas, Egypt or Kemet, Mesopotamia, which would entail Babylonian, Sumerian, Akkadian, Hittite, Hurrian, Mitanni civilizations, the Phoenicians, the Hebrews, the Philistines, the Chaldeans, and of course the Assyrians. As well as the Persians and the Elamites and the Medes. All of these peoples, all of these cultures, all of these states are united. The Indus Valley civilization, the Indian civilization, they're all united into this magnificent realm that was influenced by Greek culture, what we would call Hellenism. As a matter of fact, this world was known as the Hellenistic world, and four great kingdoms would emerge in the post-Argead Empire world. These would be the Kingdom of Macedon, the Kingdom of Egypt, the state of Seleucid Syria, or the Seleucid Empire, and also smaller kingdoms like Pergamon, Bactria, Pergamum in Western Eurasia, Western Asia Minor, and Bactria in Central Asia, roughly the equivalent of modern Afghanistan. The cultural influence of the Greeks is still much debated within this world, with Hellenism having no impact on the countryside. Hellenism and Greek culture was really restricted to the cities. It did not permeate into the countrysides. Within the cities, and within the cities, it was only embraced by the elites and those who saw favor. The most lasting impact of Hellenism, of the Hellenistic period, was really the founding of the great cities by by Alexander, the Alexandrians, and his successors. Now, And these cities include cities like Alexandria in Egypt, Kandahar, the modern day city of Kandahar in Afghanistan, which was also in Alexandria. Um, just those cities are founded. Antioch is founded. Seleucia is founded. Merv and Samarkand. And Merv and Samarkand were also founded as Alexandrias. And these cities would emerge as the great economic centers of the Silk Road during the preceding, well, I should say during the preceding centuries. And they still remain pretty much. Kandahar and Alexandria remain preeminent cities in their local regions. Now, with the death of Alexander III in 325 BCE, his dynasty, the Argead dynasty, went into rapid decline. The senior generals of the Macedonian army almost at once set in to divide the empire among themselves. The result was a prolonged conflict that lasted the better part of 300 years. The kingdoms that emerged after the fall of the Argead dynasty, these Hellenistic kingdoms, they were the successor state to the Macedonian Empire, the Argead Empire, and they were located in southwestern Asia, southeastern Europe, and northeast Africa, and they were ruled by Macedonians. And in their cities, they adopted this Greek polis culture, this Greek culture. The death of Alexander III left Macedon in a very precarious situation. He died while his consort, Roxane, was pregnant, and it was not clear whether she would even bring the child she was bearing to term. At the time, the child could have died in the womb, or it could have been a stillborn. The baby could have been stillborn. There was no way to determine whether she was going to carry a son, or whether she was carrying a son, or whether she was carrying a daughter. No one could predict the gender of the child back then. We did not have the technologies that we use now. We did not have sonographs. So that was a great mystery, and it really hamstrung Macedon. Also, the Macedonian kingship was very exclusive. It was exclusive to males only. There had never been a queen regnant over the Macedonian kingdom. They had always been ruled by male dynasts from the Argead dynasty, from the Argead family. Furthermore, even if Roxane were to give birth to a boy, there would be no way for that boy to exert his authority at birth. Every Macedonian king had to corral the various groups of his kingdoms, the aristocrats, the peasants, the martial lords. He had to corral them to do his bidding. And even if Roxane were carrying a son, this boy would not be able to do that for the next 15 to 16 years. Macedon and the ancient Near East was left in limbo. They're all united under this one dynasty, but there is no clear-cut candidate to lead them. And there were other factors to consider as well. The primary challenge to Alexander III was not any sort of implication that he had been involved in Philip II's assassination. The primary challenge to Alexander III upon his father's death was the fact that he was not a full-blooded Macedonian. His mother, Olympias, was an Epirot princess. And this was one of the motivating factors for the death of Philip II's last wife, Cleopatra, and their children, Europa and Karanis. Cleopatra was a full-blooded Macedonian female. Her children were all full-blooded Macedonian Argead dynasts. Alexander's future child would be in the same situation. He would be born to a Macedonian king, but his mother would be a foreigner. Roxane was from Bactria in the east of the Persian Empire, on the very outskirts, on the border regions of the Persian Empire. This complicated things greatly, as did the belief that the aristocrats would have the final say in all matters. Perdiccas, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus, the chief commanders of the Macedonian army, they all bargained and negotiated with each other, and they completely ignored two factors as they were trying to to hammer out a final settlement amongst themselves. One was that the Macedonian king had to be publicly acclaimed and acknowledged by the people, by the Macedonian people themselves. They also completely ignored that Philip II had another adult son, Aridaeus. Now, the only Macedonians in Babylon where Alexander III died were the men of the Macedonian army. And these men had served under both Philip II and Alexander III. They revolted against Alexander briefly. They didn't want to go any further, but they were still committed to their legacies and to their family. They would only accept an Argead dynast. Aridaeus was the older half-brother of Alexander, and all of the ancient accounts suggest there was just something not right with him. It never fully stated what was wrong with Aridaeus, but there was something about him that made him a lackluster candidate to the throne. And this is bolstered, this position, this view is bolstered by the fact that the Argeads themselves engaged in a generational genocide to eliminate rivals for the throne. After the death of every king, at every succession, there would be a dynastic civil war. Philip II killed his nephew, and he killed a number of his cousins when he could return to Macedon, and he assumed the kingship. Alexander III, he killed his half-brother. He killed a half-brother and a number of his cousins when he took over, when he inherited the throne. The fact that Aridaeus was spared by Alexander III, the fact that his mother Olympias made no attempt to kill him, lends credibility to the claim there was something wrong with him. He was clearly not a threat to Alexander, so Alexander let him live. And Aridaeus was even present during the campaigns of Alexander III. He was present in the tent while the aristocrats were negotiating with one another. Now, when the Macedonian aristocrats, when they went to the army and presented this situation to the army and asked the army who they would support, the army acclaimed Aridaeus as king, and this was a tremendous shock to the aristocrats. The Macedonian army hailed Aridaeus as Philip III, Aridaeus. They did this in Babylon, and the aristocrats, when they balked at accepting Aridaeus as their new king, the army threatened to rebel against them and to exact a traitor's vengeance on those aristocrats. And at that point, the aristocrats were forced to reconcile themselves to the fact that Alexander III was going to be succeeded by Aridaeus, and if his wife bore a son, by a posthumous son. Now, the period that followed Philip III Aridaeus' acclamation and the birth of Alexander IV, Alexander Roxana, they did eventually have a son. And the son was very unsurprisingly named Alexander IV. The period following those two events in 323 to 310 BCE, continuing to the end of the century, was a period in which various aristocrats formed alliances and tried to secure as much of the old Argead Empire for themselves as possible. And in two limited instances, tried to unite the old empire, tried to keep it together. Now, out of the failures of trying to keep the empire together came a new political order, the Hellenistic world, or we can look at it at the Hellenistic period. Now, of this period, of this age, there was really one man who stands out among his peers, has been loyal to the Argead dynasty and trying his hardest to keep the Macedonian Empire together. And it was Perdiccas. Perdiccas was the first to try to unify the Macedonian Empire. He has served as the chief minister of state for Alexander III, and he was the natural choice to take over the administration of the empire. During the negotiations at Babylon, Perdiccas had the royal symbols of Alexander III, and the greatest of these royal symbols was simply the royal heirs. And he had these symbols on a throne overlooking the negotiations. And this was a very symbolic act because it sort of cast the legacy, the legend of Alexander over these negotiations, and he did this in an attempt to cow the generals into not into not attempting to undermine the position of the Argead dynasty. Now, Perdiccas' position was further strengthened because he possessed both new kings, Philip III and Alexander IV. Both were under his guardianship, and the army was under his command. Now, in the beginning, the cards were firmly stacked in favor of the Argeads and Perdiccas. Now, and Perdiccas was in this exalted position because he was the power behind the throne. Now, Perdiccas' power quickly began to evaporate immediately after the partition of Babylon, which granted the Macedonian aristocrats provinces of their own to govern. Now, after this agreement, Perdiccas will go on to lead an attack into Egypt. And Egypt, of course, was the province of Ptolemy. This was done to take possession possession of Alexander III's body. Now, when Perdiccas arrives to the borders of Egypt, he's killed. He's killed by operatives paid by Ptolemy. And just a little insight on what was happening in the provinces. These provinces that the Macedonian aristocrats were given to govern, they turned the Macedonian aristocrats. They began to use these provinces as building blocks from which they could develop their own empires. Ptolemy, for example, he continued to put up monuments and issue edicts in the name of the Argead kings, but he was an independent operator who was amassing a following of his own and marshaling the resources of his province to project himself as the new hegemonic great king-like figure in Egypt. And Ptolemy was noted for his very cunning actions. He chose Egypt because Egypt was the most self-contained region of the world that we've been discussing. Of these Near Eastern, of these Eastern Mediterranean states or regions of these cultures that we've been observing, Egypt was the most self-contained. Egypt was hard to attack because it had some formidable natural defenses. The deserts. The deserts, so those deserts crossings, only two have been successful. The Persians and the Assyrians did it, but they were very difficult. And Egypt was, even though it was conquered by the later great imperial powers, it was still a very difficult region to hold. It was still a very difficult region to hold. It was still a very difficult region to make incursions into. Now, as noted earlier, Ptolemy hijacked the funeral procession of Alexander III. He absconded. He stole the body of Alexander III. Now, the body of the king King Alexander III was to be buried in Macedon, and this was to help legitimate his brother and his son. By stealing the body of Alexander III, Ptolemy legitimated his own rule at the expense of the Argead dynasty. So Perdiccas headed to Egypt to uproot Ptolemy, to recover the body of Alexander III, and to bring Egypt back into the royal fold, so to speak. But tragically, just as he was crossing over into Egypt, his army mutinied against him, and he was cut down by his own men who were almost certainly paid or bribed by Ptolemy to do so. Now, with the death of Perdiccas, the various Macedonian aristocrats again met up to discuss the future of the Macedonian Empire, and they met at a site called Tri Paradisus, and they did so in 321 BCE. The empire was once again divided among the aristocrats, and the aristocrats redistributed the provinces of the now dead aristocrats to new members. The murderers of Perdiccas, they received provinces, most notably Seleucus. Seleucus received Babylon, the province of Babylon, and the two kings were escorted home by Antipater, who was granted the regency of Macedon. Now, the more powerful of the Diadochi, and the Diadochi simply means the successors, was a man named Antigonus. And Antigonus received the province of Asia. Now, Antigonus was the contemporary of Philip II, and like Philip II, he had lost an eye. Now, Antigonus was immediately opposed by an alliance of the other aristocrats. Ptolemy in Egypt, Seleucus in Babylon, Lysimachus in Thrace, and Cassander, the son and successor of Antipater in Macedon. Now, these men would fight until 311 BCE when they reached the peace settlement. The settlement reinforced the status quo of the last 10 years, namely the pattern of large alliance blocks forming to contact their rival who had grown too strong. This would be the legacy of Alexander III's empire, near continuous warfare. Now, the problems associated with ruling their provinces were always subordinated to the dilemma of expanding. The foreign policy obstacles of dealing with the other Diadochi would dominate the next generation of Macedonian aristocrats. And these aristocrats are now imperial dynasts all on their own. They for the Seleucids and for the Ptolemies, they were de facto dynasts in these new imperial these new imperial orders in the formerly Macedonian provinces. Now, the settlement between the ruler on the one hand and the ruled in these new and these new domains, these were worked out in a haphazard manner. Many had no plan for their reigns other than simply eliminating their rivals. So domestically, there's not a whole lot going on to bridge the gap between the Macedonian dynasts and their local populations. Alexander at least had a plan on uniting them. We don't know how he would have fared in uniting them, but he at least had the plan of uniting them. We know there were rough sketches for his plans of integrating the Persian and the Macedonian army. We don't know how far he would have ever gotten with that, but there were some rough sketches with that. By 310 BCE,